In this video, we will be discussing photosynthesis, the nature of light, and how these two things play roles in daily life. Most of the processes occurring aren't visible, and you usually don't even realize they're happening. Light is visible by the typical human eye, and so are colors, but how is it possible? The nature of light starts off with understanding the electromagnetic spectrum. The colors on the spectrum are all part of visible light and are as follows: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet, also known as Roy G. Biv. Colors on the left-hand side are the greens, blues, and purples. They have shorter wavelengths and higher energy. Colors such as red, orange, and yellow have longer wavelengths and lower energy. To represent wavelength and energy, there is a mathematical relationship between wavelength and energy in regard to electromagnetic energy. This equation says energy equal to 1 divided by lambda. What the equation is saying is that the energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. Now moving on to how light is used and what it does. Light can be reflected, absorbed, or transmitted. Reflected means it bounces back, absorbed means it's taken in, and transmitted means it travels through. Pigment is anything that absorbs and/or reflects light. Chlorophyll is an example of a pigment because in plants it absorbs all colors except for green. Instead, it reflects green, making plants appear green to the human eye. If a plant were to only grow in green light, it would most likely die quickly since it has no light to absorb. Now that we've talked about why plants are green, let's take a deeper look at the part of the plant that holds the color, the chloroplast.
Chloroplasts work to change light energy into food, more specifically sugars for the plant. This is also known as photosynthesis. It's what makes plants have their green color. If we look deeper into the chloroplast, we can see many different layers and parts. Let's start by looking at the outer membrane. The outer membrane is permeable to small organic molecules. The inner membrane is less permeable and is studded with transport proteins. Inside the membranes of the chloroplast, there are groups of oval-looking structures stacked on top of each other. These stacks are called grana, while the individual ovals are called thylakoids. Thylakoids hold photosystems which contain pigments that give the plant a green color. There's also stroma, which is fluid inside the chloroplast.
You may not know this, but there's actually a formula that represents the process of photosynthesis. The formula states that the combination of carbon dioxide, water, and light energy produces a carbohydrate, specifically glucose and oxygen. The chemical formula is 6CO2 plus 6H2O plus light energy equals C6H12O6 plus 6O2. CO2 is used in the Calvin cycle, and H2O and light energy is used in the light-dependent reactions, which will take place later in the video. Oxygen is produced in light-dependent reactions, and glucose is produced in the Calvin cycle. Now let's talk about what light-dependent reactions in the Calvin cycle actually are.
Photosynthesis is made up of two different reactions that occur in the chloroplast. These reactions are light-dependent reactions and light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. Before going deep into either of these two reactions, let's start off with the basics of light-dependent reactions. Just from the name, you know that this reaction must depend on light, which is exactly what happens. Light-dependent reactions occur in the thylakoid membrane. The reactants, which are the things we need for the reaction to occur, are light and water. The products, which are things produced from the reaction, are ATP, NADPH, and oxygen, which is actually a waste product for the cell. Now let's go through step by step on how light-dependent reactions really work.
First, a photon of light hits photosystem 2, or PS2, and from this energy, the molecules begin to bounce around and move more. The energy from this movement is passed on to an electron, which becomes free from the chlorophyll molecule. This excited electron now moves up to a higher energy state. Next, the electron is passed down by an electron transport chain, losing energy as it goes down. The energy that is lost is used to pump hydrogen ions from the stroma, which is the interior fluid of a chloroplast, into the thylakoid membrane. The electron eventually gets to photosystem 1, or PS1, by the electron transport chain. Since the electron has lost so much energy, it needs to become excited again. So the electron is combined with NADP+. This combination results in NADPH. Oh my god, I missed it.
Through this whole process, we have now lost an electron because it became a part of NADPH. The electron needs to be replaced, but how? The electron can be replaced thanks to photolysis, or the splitting up of water, which is one of the reactants. With the light energy, the water is split up into hydrogen, oxygen, and electrons. Oxygen is a waste product for the cell, so it is diffused out, requiring no energy. Since the membrane does not let the hydrogen out, it eventually builds up and needs a way to leave the cell. The only way for the hydrogen to get out is through the ATP synthase. When it goes through the synthase, ATP is created because of the hydrogen's force. So to recap, light-dependent reactions depend on light water, which are the reactants, and after many steps and processes, we get ATP, NADPH, and oxygen as our products.
Now, let's talk about light-independent reactions, also known as the Calvin cycle. Light-independent reactions occur in the stroma, which is the background fluid of the chloroplast. The reactants of the Calvin cycle are ATP, NADPH, and carbon dioxide, and the products are glucose. The first step of the Calvin cycle is carbon fixation. In this stage, carbon dioxide, which is inorganic, is turned into an organic molecule with the help of an enzyme called rubisco. Rubisco pulls RUBP and carbon dioxide together to create 3-PGA.
The next step is reduction. This reaction is a redox reaction, which means it involves transferring of electrons. Since it is a reduction, electrons are being gained. The ATP and the NADPH molecules supply the electrons needed for the CO2 molecule to be reduced. The CO2 is then reduced into G3P. A molecule of the G3P is then set aside to make glucose. Step 3 is the regeneration of RUBP. During this stage, an enzyme rearranges the carbon molecules into 3 5-carbon molecules, which is RUBP. Sometimes, plants need to change how photosynthesis is undergone based on their surroundings. Like if it's really hot and arid. CAM and C4 plants are 2 other plants that produce oxygen and glucose in slightly different ways. These processes differ from C3 plants, which are the basic plants that perform photosynthesis in the typical way.
C4 plants change the location of carbon fixation. The carbon dioxide is fixed into a 4-carbon molecule before even entering the Calvin cycle so that the carbon can be stored. The Calvin cycle itself will occur in the bundle of sheath cells. The benefit of this change is that it prevents oxygen buildup inside the plant. If oxygen builds up, it damages the enzyme ribosco, which is essential for the Calvin cycle to occur.
In CAM, the timing of fixation is changed. During CAM, CO2 is picked up during the night when the stomata is open, and then is fixed and stored during the day when the stomata is closed. Then, the stored carbon is used in the Calvin cycle. This adaptation allows for photosynthesis to occur in dry climate.
And that's it for this lesson. We hope you learn more about photosynthesis and how it works. Thanks for watching.